Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build MLB edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over this tiny 6-game slate over at DraftKings. It's a small slate, so things can go pretty horribly wrong if you don't hit it just right. So for me, it's a day where I take it a little bit easy, but it's a Coors slate. So that means that a lot of the attention will naturally be on Coors, which means I don't think we need to do a whole lot to get different on this slate. But I'll walk you through it, point you to my favorite pitchers and my favorite stacks. If I help you out at all, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. We'll be covering NFL, NBA, and MLB all year long. And obviously today is an MLB show. All right, let's get down to it. We got the Jays in Boston at Fenway Park taking on the Red Sox. Jose Barrios takes on Boston. On the other side, we have Josh Winkowski taking on the Jays. Obviously, the Jays get a park upgrade. Boston's park is second in park factor. So, yeah, I mean, you should have a little bit of interest in the Jays naturally. The numbers don't pop off the page here as far as who they're facing in Winkowski, but he doesn't strike anybody out. He does give a little bit of power. And obviously, this park is not an easy one to pitch at. Let's see, where's he at on here? He's actually not even in the pitching pool at the moment. Cooper Criswell is actually listed as a starter here. So might need to verify that. Let me actually type in the probable pitcher for today, because that's a little bit annoying that we're not current here. Let's see. Actually, it's still listed as TBD, and Criswell is listed as tomorrow's pitcher. So that's a little interesting. Just something to keep an eye on. I guess either way, if it's Criswell or it's Winkowski, the Jays still look pretty good here. Park upgrade, they have 165 collective ISO. They don't strike out very much, not even a 19% collective whiff rate for the projected lineup. So yeah, I think they're totally fine. I got nothing wrong with the Jays. I definitely want them in my, play or stack pool, if you will, and to get into some one-offs with like Vlad or Dalton Varsho or George Springer. That sounds pretty appealing. I think the way to attack Winkowski, if he ends up being the guy, would be from the left side, but I don't think it really matters. I just think it's a good park and the second best park on the slate. So the Jays do look appealing. I'm actually pretty interested in Boston, though. On the other side, they get Jose Barrios. He is the bigger name, obviously, that is pitching in this game and one of the better names on the board. Not a good slate for pitching at all. Bailey Ober is the top price guy at 9.2K, and Bryce Miller at 8.9K, and perhaps Max Fried. Those are the two guys that you actually want to gravitate to and roster for the most part tonight. Of course, it's baseball. It's baseball, so that could just go completely against all logic. Anyways, Boston at Fenway, they're pretty promising. 213 collective ISO. They do strike out a little bit, so there is a little bit of interest in Barrios there, especially at 8K flat price. But he's been not great on the road. And obviously, when you factor that logic into a not so great matchup in a not so great park, and the fact that he averages just 12 fantasy points per game on the road this year, I don't think it's a very advantageous spot for Barrios. So I'm not really targeting him. And Boston looks really, really good to me. So Fenway Park is the second best park as far as park factor goes on the slate. And since everybody's gravitating towards Coors, I really, really like Boston here. I think you can play the Jays as well, but if I'm doing anything out of this game, it is firing up Boston stacks. Barrios is best attacked from the left side this year, 195 ISO to lefties, 185 ISO to lefties last year. Giving up a 48% hard hit rate. It's 53% on the right side too, so it looks like he's an equal opportunity sad sack at times. And his strikeout rate isn't elite either, so everything does look pretty good for Boston. Moving on here, we got the Braves and the Twins. Max Fried looks like one of the better pitchers on the slate. He is coming in at 8.7K price tag. He's been very meh lately. He doesn't have a single game over 17 fantasy points in his last 4 outings, but we know he's obviously a good real-life pitcher, and he's weirdly been way better on the road this year as opposed to at home. 13 fantasy points per game at home, 18 on the road. He has not faced the Twins yet, so we don't know much about that. However, the Twins is really not the best matchup in the world. We know Fried isn't really a high elite K pitcher in the first place, and they come in offering 20% whiff rate against Southpaws. So I think you could entertain stacking the Twins here, but honestly, it's not a good slate for pitching, so I'm just going to take a stand and go with Fried. He's been good on the road. It's a decent matchup. I don't think he's going to be there for major strikeouts, but I think he's usually a guy we can trust to last somewhat deep into games. He's hit 6+ in his. Well, actually, lately he's like I said, he's been struggling lately, so it's not been something we can trust recently. Still, 6-game slate. The Twins are a team you can get by. And I think he's fine. I think at 8.7K, it's getting a little bit up there for him, but on this slate, he's definitely in play. On the other side is Bailey Ober, who is the most expensive pitcher on the board. Braves come in with a 22% whiff rate. Ober and Fried are just naturally going to look, appealing here just because it's not a good pitching slate. I think their matchups are both just okay. I think Ober's got the better matchup. The Braves strike out a little bit more. And obviously just Ronald Acuna not being around anymore hurts them considerably. So I don't trust Ober or Fried really. I just have a slight lean towards Fried just because he's cheaper and I think he's going to be less owned. Let me go check the ownership. Let me get that out there for a second. Check the ownership really quick. Where are we at with ownership? Bryce Miller is the chalkiest arm, and he's my favorite arm too, and I'll get to him in a little while. And Ryan Pepio is second most owned. So that's a little bit annoying to me because those are the two guys I do like the most on this slate. Bailey Ober does come in with the third most ownership at 27%. So I don't know if I want to go exactly fire up the Braves here. I think that is an option. You certainly can play Braves. It's just the matchup doesn't, scream like you must play Atlanta. I think what I would just do is be a little bit underweight on Bailey Ober. Fried's coming in fourth with 20% ownership. Again, I'm not super excited about either pitcher, but I also don't think they're going to be gas cans in this situation. The fact that the ownership is pulling towards the two guys I like, it's very annoying. I think that's going to potentially create a situation where one of these chalky arms gets slapped around pretty good. But logically speaking, they do look like really great plays. All right, let's keep it going here. We got the Padres and the Cardinals. Randy Vasquez taking on St. Louis. On the other side, Kyle Gibson taking on the Padres. As we know, Padres do not strike out. Randy Vasquez does not have an elite K rate, and he's walking lefties at an almost 11% clip, also giving up a lot of ISO power there, 200 to the left side of the plate. So Padres look pretty good. It's not a very good park for hitting, but if you want to stack up your Padres, I'd start from the left side and go from there. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lefties projected in there, and then we can obviously roll with Manny and Xander if we want to as well from the right side to complete the stack. I will say, hey, on a 6-game slate, when it goes 6-game or smaller, you don't have to go full 5-man stack. You certainly don't have to go 5-3. I think you can kind of do a little bit of whatever you want. You can also get cute and kind of do what I'm alluding to a little bit, and that is play both Bryce Miller and Ryan Pepio from the same game. That curbs your upside for one of the pitchers because obviously only one of them can get a win. But it's just something that not everybody is going to do, especially if those two guys are going to be chalky. If you say, hey, you know what, screw it, they're good chalk, I'm going to eat that chalk and get different with my bats, which is what I want to do probably on this slate, then you can get different by playing them both together. I don't think everybody's going to do that. On the other side, Randy Vasquez, his numbers don't look good. Not even a 9% strikeout rate to lefties, so you can probably start your Cardinal stacks with lefties. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them as well. So they're fine, but I don't really like the Padres or the Cardinals in a vacuum because they're in a pitcher park, and it just doesn't seem like this is a setting where they're going to explode. We got Tigers and the White Sox, obviously two really, really bad offensive teams. Tigers do have a little bit of pop, though. 185 ISO. That looks pretty darn good, and they're going up against Davis Martin, who has a 14% walk rate against lefties, 10% against righties. That is disgusting. So even if his power limitation continues here, he has not really given up much so far. Small sample size to be sure, but if that's going to continue, perhaps we can take advantage of him with the Tigers getting on base in general. He's had like 2+ walks in all but one start so far, so that's not good. So I think the Tigers are a decent stack. I'm curious if they're going to end up being popular just because it looks like a pretty positive matchup. So I have no problems with Tigers. I just don't ever feel excited to play the Tigers. But on this tiny 6-game slate, I do think the Tigers are absolutely in play. On the other side, the White Sox, let's see who their actual listed matchup is. Ty Madden, he's 4K on here. Not really clear as far as how long of a leash he has. It's his debut. But he's definitely had some issues in the minors. Let's see, he had 7.97 ERA across 18 starts. For those keeping score at home, that's not great. So obviously the White Sox aren't good either. 120 ISO, 24% K rate. if we get the sense that Madden is actually going to be someone we can trust, as far as getting a longer leash, 4K flat, it's gonna be really tough to completely ignore that. But do I feel good about him at the moment? Not really. I think it gets to the point where how expensive are the stacks that you're looking at, and would it make sense to throw Ty Madden in there at 4K? It might, if you want to stack up cores, but there is not like a lot of really expensive guys outside of cores here. Even looking at cores, um, a couple of the guys are pricey for the Colorado side. You know, Jake Berger for Miami is pretty expensive at 5.6K, but you don't have the Dodgers on the slate, you don't have the Yankees on the slate, so it's not really. I just don't think it's completely necessary, especially if he's going to end up carrying ownership. Let's see if I'm going to look at pitching ownership. He is carrying almost 14% ownership. So if that ends up going up, if we do some refresh and we start seeing the numbers pop, and Ty Madden is going to be really owned, that could be an interesting fade or a possible leverage. He's projected for an 85 pitch count, so that would make me feel better if I wanted to use him for sure. And at 4K, you certainly can do that as a price. I just don't think he's necessary. I think if we had Dodgers or Yankees, I'd feel more obliged, but I don't really feel like. I think instead we can maybe look at the White Sox as maybe a mini stack, or even entertain a full stack if he's actually going to carry ownership. 14% ownership is not super heavy, so I would wait and see. It is only 12:37 Central. Maybe it spikes a bit, and if it does, we can maybe take advantage of that. All right, the big game of that is obviously Miami at Colorado. We got the Coors Field game. This is the number one park factor, stadium in the league, obviously. So you definitely have to have some interest in the fish. Logically speaking, Miami looks like the best stack on the board. The only issue for me would be ownership. It's probably going to be very, very popular. Like I said, Jake Berger is the only one that's really, I don't even want to say egregiously priced. It's appropriately priced. 5.6 for like the best power hitter on their team in Coors Field seems appropriate. They do have some power here. Collective 148 ISO. They have 4 guys, as you can see, that can really launch it. And Ryan Feltner is not somebody we should be really afraid of. Worth noting, he's kind of curbing the power from the right side, only 135 ISO. Lefties have been the way to attack him for the most part this year and last year, really, except for he didn't really give up much power last year at all. But it doesn't really matter. They get such a massive park upgrade that you can definitely do a full Miami stack. And I wouldn't worry that much about the lefty versus righty, like the splits issue too much here, just because I think they get a bit of a boost. But having said that, if I'm running a lot of lineups, I want exposure to Miami. But if I want to just do a single entry and gain massive edge, I think a really, really quick way to do that is to be underweight or completely go away from Miami on a small 6-game slate. One cool way to do that is to actually stack the Rockies too. I'm sure we'll still garner ownership just because the game is in Coors, but they always garner less ownership than the team that is visiting them. Obviously, they're not a very reliable team, but they do have a 167 ISO against righties, and they're facing Edward Cabrera, who has real issues against lefties and gives up power to both sides of the plate. 16.7% walk rate, 228 ISO against lefties. I mean, let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lefties for the Rockies. You can start it off with Charlie Blackmon, Ryan McMahon, Nolan Jones, and Jake Cave should be in the lineup. So Rockies look pretty darn good. So I actually like the Rockies. When you look at the matchup, I like them more than Miami tonight. So realistically speaking, as far as park upgrade and all that goes, I mean, the Miami is definitely near the top of the list. But I am going to take a different unscenic route and go away from Miami a little bit to help me gain a little bit of leverage on the field. You don't have to do that. If you want to play it safer and eat some chalk, that's fine. You can do that. I don't really like to play the chalky stack. It's just not something I do. If you're playing cash games, obviously you can do that. And even if you're playing in tournaments, you can still get a lot of exposure to Miami bats. It makes sense to do that. I'm just not going to do that personally. Obviously, I don't want any of the pitchers in this game. I mean, you could use them. It's a small slate. The pitching seems to be gravitating towards the 2 best arms on the slate as far as ownership goes, and these offenses usually are not that good. So if you want to just ignore the park factor, you definitely could play Edward Cabrera or Ryan Feltner. But I don't want to do that. All right, last game of the night. We have the Rays and the Mariners. Water refuel. All right, so two best pitchers on the slate, so you can definitely go against that in one way or another if you want to. I mean, they're carrying monster ownership at 40 and 37%. We got Ryan Pepio taking on the Mariners. They do have a 27.6% K rate. That looks pretty darn good to me. Pepio does walk lefties at a 10% clip. He gives up a little power to lefties as well. So there's that, but there's not really that many guys that the Mariners have that you should be very afraid of from the left side. Cal Raleigh, that's about it. I'm not too worried about the Mariners. I think obviously based off of ownership, you can stack Mariners if you want, or go for a mini stack if you're not going to play Pepio. But he looks like a really good play. Bryce Miller on the other side gets the Rays, who strike out at 25% clip. He gives up a 204 ice to the lefty, so you definitely can consider a one-off with like Brandon Lowe or even Josh Lowe. They do have 1, 2, 3, 4 projected lefties in this lineup. Again, not super scared. I think Brandon Lowe is an interesting one-off. Based off the splits, I wouldn't be shocked if he carries some ownership, though. Bryce Miller isn't really a guy I like to target in general as far as like stacking against him. He's pretty good at home too. 22 fantasy points per game at home, 2.10 ERA, as opposed to double that with ERA on the road and only 12 fantasy points per game on the road. So he's quite comfortable in front of his home fan base. And the matchup, the numbers all really look pretty good for him. I think he's got 1 or 2 batters that he has to worry about. The rest of the Rays do strike out quite a bit, and he doesn't really walk guys too much. So I think he's in a plenty fine spot. So quick recap. I really like the Rays and Mariners pitching. That's where I'm going to start. If I go look at the ownership just to see where we're at as far as that goes, I think it's funny because going in, I would not have thought that Ober and Fried would be that much less owned than these guys. So you definitely can go and get Ober or Fried. You certainly can do that punt with Ty Madden 2 at 4K. I'm just going to eat the pitching chalk. They're the two best pitchers on the slate. It's not a game with a very high total for good reason. So I think, you just sacrifice that extra 4 points for the win, and just take the two pitchers with the best floor and ceiling on the slate. So if we're going to do that, how do we get different? Like I said, first way to get different is you're rostering both those pitchers from the same game. Curbs your upside just slightly, but it also gets you different overall. And then for stacking, I don't want to stack the fish tonight. I see the logic to it. They are a fine stack. They get a massive park upgrade. They do have a little bit of power going into the situation. And Ryan Feltner is not somebody we have to be afraid of. So if you want to stack Miami and ignore what I'm going to do, no problem. They're fully capable of going off for 12 runs and totally nuking the slate. However, they're just as likely to just be awful. So I would prefer to go Rockies in the Coors game if I'm going to attack that game. And then my second favorite stack of the night is going to be Boston in Fenway. I think they're in an advantageous spot. I don't think they're going to be that owned with Coors on the slate and also Jose Barrios on the other side. The other stack that I would really find interest in is probably going to be the Tigers, just because I think they have a little bit of power there. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It would be if Ty Madden's ownership increases greatly. Right now he's about 14%. If we're getting at like 20, 25%, where people are really just stacking up the bats and pairing him with Bryce Miller or something, I think targeting Ty Madden could be interesting. I don't think you have to do that. Right now, I'm probably just fading him and just hoping he doesn't smash his price tag right now. All right, so that's going to do it for me. Hopefully it helps you out a little bit. If it does, give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.